Hello and welcome to episode 122 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And we are coming off of a big dog week. Yes, that's right. The week 6 slate came down to Derrick Henry, and it wasn't even December yet. Henry was around 26% owned in tournaments and roughly the same in cash. And honestly, Derrick Henry has probably been the single player who has given me the most problems in DFS over the last few years. And let me try to talk through why. First of all, he's just such a massive outlier. Like, we don't see NFL teams build entire offenses around 250-pound, two-down power backs anymore. We also don't see running backs break off long, and I mean long, like 70-plus yard touchdown runs at such a high rate. But even at that outlier rate that Henry breaks them off at, note that Henry's longest run this season, his first 4 games was only 16 yards. Like, these long runs just don't happen very often. Our eyes deceive us, but we remember them. The second thing is he's not game flow independent. I mean, he just isn't. When they were in the 2-minute drill, when the Titans were in the 2-minute drill, it was Jeremy McNichols. On most third downs, Henry's on the sidelines. He has a total of 24 catches in his last 20 games. So in game flows that go sideways for the Titans, and you have Derrick Henry, you're just dusted. The third thing I would say about Derrick Henry is because of the way he scores his fantasy points, strict rushing yards and touchdowns, the range of outcomes is very wide. In games where he doesn't score a touchdown, like, he really buries you. When he gets TDs and long runs, he goes absolutely nuclear. And this year already, he's had 3 games below 20 points. He had 1 game of just 8 points. Last season, he had 8 games under 20 points, but also 3 games with more than 32 points. So the range is really, really wide. And that range of game flows, the range of outcomes, is typically something that's not correct in tournaments at his ownership. In other words, he's like 30% owned at a high price tag. DFS Tournament 101, he's going to be a solid fade for most humans, though. So let's get back to Sunday's game. Perhaps you could argue that this spot was different, that this Texans run defense is so bad and the Titans are so committed to Derrick Henry that the game flow risk wasn't really there. And that Henry's price, which was so close to Alexander Mattison and to Mike Davis, Derrick Henry was cheaper than Aaron Jones. It wasn't that prohibitive. Maybe we could say all that, and maybe that's all fair. All that said, Henry was on track for one of his, good but not spectacular games. With 9 minutes left in the game, he had 100 yards and no touchdowns. And I believe no catches also at that point. Then boom, 94-yard touchdown. Then the game goes to overtime somehow. He gets another 13 points in overtime. Wildcat TD run to win the game. That's the range, though, and that's what I'm talking about. That's what makes him such a hard thing to deal with weekly. But I think the best argument for Henry, honestly, is just that he's a grown-ass man. Like, just a total freak outlier human in an outlier offense in terms of efficiency, in terms of how he's deployed. Obviously, in hindsight, Alexander Mattison over Big Dog for 100 less looks laughable. And so, while I had a decent week, if I go Derrick Henry and Chase Claypool over Myles Gaskin and Adam Thielen, it's just a total smash. And gosh, I mean, if you walked into a room and said, which 2 do I want? Big Dog and Claypool are these like freaks in terms of size and speed and athleticism. They'd take Gaskin and Thielen and stuff them in a locker. So yeah, not too upset about it, but much like Odell rookie year, much like Tyreek Hill in 2018, and by we, I mean I, need to be willing to acknowledge outliers, at least. Okay, enough about the Big Dog. One other thing about this slate that I thought was a really good example of leverage in tournaments. Alexander Mattison is going to be massively owned. We knew that. I regret a little bit, at least, not thinking through Mattison more, even for cash. Atlanta pretty decent versus the run. Amir Abdullah a threat on pass downs. Mike Boone a threat on run downs. DraftKings price on Alexander Mattison was pretty fair. On Fanduel, Mattison was extremely cheap. But anyways, paths to Mattison failing, I think we're there, and maybe we did not acknowledge them enough. And then also Adam Thielen massively owned for tournaments too. And Irv Smith was owned also. So easy leverage on Justin Jefferson, just printing Sklansky bucks by playing Justin Jefferson regardless of the outcome. More leverage, Julio Jones, 6,700 in one of the best matchups that we'll see all year, 9% in the Millie Maker. And he correlates really well with Jefferson. Doesn't correlate as well with Madison. Jefferson and Julio correlate well together because they both can score points quickly. And, I don't think that there's any way to look back and say, hey, we should have played Julio in cash, because there's no way to say that Julio, where he was at with his hamstring. Like, this dude plays at 60% health all the time. And so there's no way to know if that's what he was going to do or if he was actually 100%, which it clearly looked like he was. But in tournaments, for sure, Julio 6,700. And, I mentioned scoring points quickly with Julio and Jefferson. One thing about the Derrick Henry stuff is that I typically don't love playing him as a bringback in GPP lineups because he eats so much clock. He accumulates his points so much slower in theory due to all the runs. But the more I think about it, that's probably wrong. In the games where Henry accesses this 30, 40 point ceiling, there are these game-wrecking long TD runs that rack up points quickly that do speed the game up. So one way to leverage off of Tannehill, A.J. Brown, Jonnu on Sunday was to play Watson, Fuller, Cooks, and then bring it back with Henry. And that's how our Pat Kerrane won the $8 GPP on DraftKings for $10K with that Texans double stack, bring it back with Henry. Shout out to Pat on the win, man. Great team. You guys know him. He's crushing the dynasty stuff. I thought his redraft stuff that was in our draft kit was really, really awesome. He also has a pod with Leone called Establish the Edge, part of our network along with the NBA pod. So check that out. But yeah, congrats to Pat. Great win. Last thing I wanted to mention about Sunday was the punt tight end stuff. Again, I know it feels like I talk about this every week, but guys like Jonnu and Gesicki and Hawkinson and Mark Andrews even and Evan Ingram, they're just not priced right for their volume. At least they weren't in week 6 and they haven't been for much of the year. And then we run into spots like the ones that Burton and Irv had. I mean, punt tight end has been crushing in cash on DraftKings going all the way back to the old Rob Gronkowski days. And note that there was definitely some FPS, fancy play syndrome, in tournaments. Burton was only 14% on DraftKings. He was like 3% on Fanduel. Irv was 10% on DraftKings. As the game evolves, people are looking for reasons to get off chalk, right? They're like, oh my God, I can't play these punt tight ends. Everyone's going to play them. The next thing you know, they're only 14% and 10%. And things like this happen. And then you get people just playing outright bad plays for their price as leverage. I think the best leverage spots are ones that we found with like the Texans pass game and Justin Jefferson, like still good plays, but just leverage off of what everybody else is doing. Okay, I know no one cares, but I did have 7 GPP teams this week. The best one that I had was Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Justin Jefferson, Irv Smith, full-blown game stack of Atlanta, Minnesota, what I consider 2 of the worst defenses in the league with very capable quarterback play, of course. Then I had Mixon and Bengals defense. So I don't always prioritize running back defense correlation. I've talked about how it can be bad in tournaments, but we know Mixon's usage is just so much better with a lead. And I did think that Cincinnati's defense was very underpriced here relative to Phil Rivers' downside. Also, Joe Mixon was only 6% owned coming off of back-to-back 30-touch games, so I felt pretty good about that. I also had Robbie Anderson in that lineup at 3% owned, which I really liked. Like in most other matchups, Robbie at that price would have been like 20% or more. And then I tried to correlate Robbie with David Montgomery in there as my other running back, hoping that Chicago-Carolina game would get weird. But Montgomery, he was like 28% owned. He doesn't really break long runs, so that was really high ownership for someone like that, probably a mistake. Okay, before we get to today's listener questions, I have a very special announcement. We have a sponsor for the podcast, if you can actually believe that. Someone wants to sponsor this pod despite my sex jokes and other terrible bits. But anyways, we are only going to work with companies we really respect, and I really think that Underdog Fantasy has some innovative games you guys will enjoy. The concept I think is most interesting right now is something they're calling Battle Royale. It's a combination of DFS and best ball. It's really simple. You draft a six-player roster in a snake draft format, but it's a GPP-style tournament for 1 week. So the strategy is really interesting. In a 6-round draft, you aren't going to go really deep into the player pool, but I think there's a lot to think about with stacking and trying to find some off-the-board plays that have a reasonable chance of a spike week because, much like regular DFS, you can't just play the optimal and expect to win a large field tournament. So you can get in for $5. First place is $4K. After you deposit, mention on the pop-up you heard about Underdog on ETR, and you'll be eligible for some ETR swag that we'll have an announcement on soon. Again, underdogfantasy.com, and make sure to enter promo code ETR after you make a deposit. Okay, enough is enough. It's time for everyone's favorite portion of the program. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. Okay, I had a backlog of questions for this week, so I didn't actually ask for any new ones on Twitter. These were some leftovers from previous weeks that I wanted to be sure I got to. We are going to do 7. Question 1 comes from Double J65. He says, if you had decided years ago that you did not want kids, what would the GTO life construction be from there? Still settle down with a like-minded partner or play the field for life? So one thing that I think gets lost in the whole kids thing is the lifestyle you wanted or had before kids. Like, I know a ton of dudes who all they do and all they want to do is lie around, watch TV, sit in their underwear, sit in their house, gamble, whatever. And, if that's your bag, like, having kids won't be that much of a lifestyle change in the baby phase. Like, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, whatever. You basically are going to be home a ton. You have to be home a ton. Now, if you're the kind of person who wants max freedom, max flexibility, max money to spend on yourself and traveling and all your desires and activities and whatever else you want to do, and you decide you don't want kids, my opinion is you better really max that out to the limit, because having kids is so rewarding and fun on a lot of levels, in a lot of different phases in life, I think. So the flip side of it better be extreme. So like if you go the no kid route, which is totally cool, would never fault anyone, but I don't want to hear about your, Friday nights playing 2-5 at the local casino and being miserable. Like, I don't want to hear about your 9-to-5 cubicle job that you hate. No, if you go the no kid route, I want to hear about some wild shit, man. Like, I have so little. Give me something. You're not in the mood. You get in the mood. I want to hear about sex dungeons in Europe and last minute trips to Ibiza and, wild drugs and blowing money on things like courtside tickets for NBA games. So to go back to the question, it seems unlikely to me that you would find a like-minded partner totally up for that extreme lifestyle. Maybe. I mean, I'm sure it's possible. Just seems unlikely to me. So my answer, Double J, would be play the field for life route. Question 2 from Sheldon. He says, I never hear you talk about Showdown. Is this a format you generally stay away from? So I think Showdown is an interesting game, but it's not really fantasy football to me. It's more of a game theory contest where a lot of the goal in large field tournaments in Showdown isn't to figure out the best plays. It's to figure out a construction that no one else is on. In other words, a good lineup in Showdown, quote unquote, is something that is within the realm of possibility, maybe, and that's unique because your EV when you're on a duplicate lineup just gets absolutely slashed. And again, I do think that it's an interesting game, but I don't love talking about it because I think it's just not the kind of content that appeals to most people. That said, we have put a big emphasis on Showdown at ETR because, of course, we're trying to win money. I mean, that's the name of the game. And so Cody and Taylor and Leone are all working really hard for each of the 3 big Showdown slates weekly to figure out the optimal strat for each one. And we have a really good evergreen article. It's actually free on the site if you're interested in it, which we outline what we think is the right way to think about Showdown and to win in Showdown. Again, it's free up on the DFS tab on the site if you're interested. And I know, people are going to say, wait, Adam, all of DFS is a game. All of DFS is a game, not real fantasy football. Isn't that the point? Isn't that what you talk about every week? And yeah, I agree to some degree, but cash games and full slate GPPs much more closely resemble football and fantasy football. It's just a better game to talk about, in my opinion. Question 3 from Matt P. He says, do Gender Consultants LLC hold info on how altitude affects POE, pumps over expectation? And then he puts in parentheses, Colorado. Yeah, so I was in Denver last week and everyone is like, oh, be careful. If you have 1 beer, it feels like 8, it's altitude. And I don't know. I don't really notice that. What I did notice, though, was during the frying pan match, which I played in Denver a few years ago, I just got so tired. Like, it was insane. For those of you guys who don't know what I'm talking about, a few years ago, I played Steve Bass, former number 1 player at Notre Dame. Believe he played on the Challenger Tour for a bit, professional tennis player, former professional tennis player. But he used a frying pan, and I used my racket. And, I wasn't in the best shape. I mean, I thought I was in okay shape for the match, but certainly not the best. But it was crazy. Like, I was really tired at the end of the second set. I blow 4 match points. No excuses, but I blow 4 match points, which I'll never forget. Just total devastation. 4 match points at the end of the second set. And then in the third set, I was just toast, man. Like, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It's tough to say if it was because of the altitude or because my fitness was just, straight butt sauce. But man, I couldn't move. And I honestly think it was more because of my fitness. I'm not going to make the excuse of the altitude. But as for how altitude affects POE, pumps over expectation, we do not have the data on that. I'm sorry, Matt. I assume Matt is thinking this is like golf or baseball, where you can hit a ball significantly further in the thin air. Matt thinks he's going to move to Denver and turn into Ron Jeremy or Todd Helton or something like that. I don't know, man. I doubt it, but I'll be sure to let you know. Question 4 from Mark. He says, in playing 50-50s and double ups, should it make a difference to me whether it's single entry or not? Yes, definitely. I talked about this in the book, Skin to Fur, of course. I talked about it a bunch. I'd say the multi-entry double ups are some of the tougher cash games that you can find. And this should be a really simple concept to understand. I hope the best players are putting 150 entries into those, the same team 150 times. The weaker players are putting in 1 or 5 or whatever. So the field is heavily weighted towards the best players, making it, pretty tough. On the other hand, the large field single entry double ups are going to be some of the best games you can find. Like some of these lower stake ones, like the 25 single entry double up or the 5 or whatever, they have like 8,000 entries. And we know there aren't 8,000 strong cash players on the site. But if that was the multi-entry, well, say the top 30 players each put in 150, they'd take up 4,500 spots. So yeah, single entry double ups is what I prefer for sure. Question 5 from Eric Knight. He says, what do you think the future looks like for dining out at restaurants? The germ concern is not just going to vanish after this pandemic. Longtime listeners of the solo pod know that the prevailing bit here didn't used to be sex. Like the bit was germs. And I would just be inundated weekly with questions about optimal germ avoidance. It was crazy. The crazy thing is now I think it's just gone so far the other way. Like the germ avoidance thing was a good bit because what I was saying at the time sounded insane. Like not sharing a bottle of water with someone. Someone asked to borrow my deodorant. I just let them keep it, not wanting to shake hands. Now all this stuff is standard. It's not even funny anymore. But anyway, I think restaurants are going to be fine eventually. It's just something that can't be replaced by the internet, like retail stores, like, the Gap or whatever. No one's going in there again when you can just go online. Movies, I'd say you can just watch movies at home. Movie theaters are obviously in big trouble. But eating at restaurants, even in, downtown Philadelphia, extremely liberal, all masked up everywhere. Restaurants are packed outside. Like people are falling over each other to get to a table, can barely even get a reservation. And then if you go, to the shore, to the Jersey Shore, the burbs, or, I was out in the Denver suburbs. Even inside, it's packed in restaurants. And so like as Americans, we just love to eat out. It's like one of our favorite activities that can't be replicated by the internet. So yeah, the menus with the QR code on the phone and paper cups, if you want instead of glass, that's all good. But I'd guess that when this is over, restaurants return to full peak. All right, question 6 from Tanner Sansom. He says, what is the most valuable lesson you've learned playing DFS throughout your career? Yeah, just thinking probabilistically. So, it's so helpful in DFS and in life to understand that nothing is black and white. Like there's no easy answer. So when you're making a decision about whether to play Alexander Madison, you have to understand that some of the time he does well, some of the time he does just okay, and some of the time he's dust. But it's not just random, right? Like we take the information we have and try to assign probabilities, even if they're kind of just gut feelings on how often each of those outcomes happen. And that's a good lesson for life also, I think, with any decision that you make. When you get married, there's just no way to be 100% sure that it's the right move. I don't care what anyone says. It could be great. It could be meh. It could end brutally. We just take the information we have and try to make the best decision. Like when we buy a house, it's the same thing. It's not black and white, whether this is the perfect decision or not. Or even when we order like lunch, we order something we think we like, but man, it could end up bad. Some chance, maybe 1% chance we get food poisoning. Some chance we don't like it. Some chance we end up on the toilet for the rest of the day. So in that sense, I think making decisions in DFS is a lot like making decisions in life. Just have to process the information that we have to the best of our capabilities and then understand that it's kind of out of our control after that. All right, last question we're going to do today comes from Default 5. He says, I couldn't find the GenderLabs LLC helpline. If someone you are on team sex with and she claims to have saved your semen in the freezer, is this a viable strategy for pregnancy? Will this cause potential harmful side effects? Should I be concerned? Yeah, so the semen freezing space is an extremely competitive, extremely crowded market. Our R&D team here at GenderLabs LLC has not even looked into this. This is not what we're about. We're looking to play a different game, the gender optimization through predictive analytics game. And with that in mind, I am excited to unveil a new metric. A lot of our current strategies, current techniques that we teach during our in-home consultations are independent of opponent. They're not GTO. They're not game theory optimal. And that's been very successful still, very effective for us and our clients, the exploitative method. But in order to go to the next level, I want to develop PVOA, penetration adjusted value over average. And what this allows us to do is adjust our game plan for our partner. It's not a one size fits all strategy. It's like in football, the Bears are 5-1, but are they actually good? I mean, they've played the Lions, the Giants, the Falcons, the Colts, the Bucks, and the Panthers. Are they really that much better than, say, like the Texans, who are 1-5, but have played Kansas City, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Jacksonville, Tennessee? There's just so many stats that are so bad when people don't adjust for opponent, like tight end, DVP. I mean, some NFL teams don't even use their tight end in the pass game. Others feature it. It all depends on who you play. So anyways, I think that this new PVOA metric we have will increase our success rate on gender optimization from 99% to 99.9%. And I'm excited about that. Okay, that is going to do it for today's solo pod. Be sure to head to establishedrun.com. We are running a sale right now for rest of season because there are 6 weeks in the books. I'll be back later tonight with Silva for the Team by Team pods, for producer Luke, for Jerry. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.